أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين بالقاسم محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome to Tuesday night program of Tawassul. And inshallah, following the dua, we will have a brief commentary on the third dua from Sahifa Sajjadiyyah. Without further ado, I would request Brother Rahil to go ahead and start us off with the recitation of Dua Tawassul. Bismillah.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم إني أسألك وأتوجه إليك بنبيك نبي الرحمة محمد صلى الله عليه وآله يا أبا القاسم يا رسول الله يا إمام الرحمة يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا أمير المؤمنين يا علي بن أبي طالب يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا فاطمة الزهراء يا بنت محمد يا قرة عين الرسول يا سيدتنا ومولاتنا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيهة عند الله اشفعي لنا عند الله يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها المجتبى يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا عبد الله يا حسين بن علي أيها الشهيد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن الحسين يا زين العابدين يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها الباقر يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا عبد الله يا جعفر بن محمد أيها الصادق يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا موسى بن جعفر أيها الكاظم يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي يا ابن موسى أيها الرضا يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها التقي الجواد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي يا ابن محمد أيها الهادي النقي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها الزكي العسكري يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وسي الحسن والخلف الهجة أيها القائم المنتظر المهدي يا ابن رسول الله يا هجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله حاجات. يا سادتي وموالي إني توجهت بكم أئمتي وعدتي ليوم فقري وحاجتي إلى الله وتوسلت بكم إلى الله واستشفعت بكم إلى الله فاشفعوا لي عند الله واستنكذوني من ذنوبي عند الله فإنكم وسيلتي إلى الله وبحبكم وبقربكم أرجو نجاة من الله فكونوا عند الله رجائي يا سادتي يا أولياء الله صلى الله عليهم أجمعين ولعن الله أعداء الله الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين آمين رب العالمين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
سلام محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجنا. أحسنتم جزاكم الله. Inshallah, before I start, let's remember all those people who are in need of dua, especially on this night when we recite this dua, dua tawassul, doing tawassul to Imam of our time, and rest of the Masumeen. People who are suffering, going through difficult times in their lives, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring them out of all of those difficulties. Let's recite this ayat from Surah Namal together 5 times. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه يكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف 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 السوء ويجعلكم خلفاء الأرض إله مع الله قليلا ما تذكرون. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Also, let's remember all of our marhumin with the Surah Fatih, especially marhum Syed Asad al-Zadi ibn Syed Wajid al-Zadi. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen ar-Rahman ar-Rahim Maliki Yawm al-Din. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين بالقاسم محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. أما بعد، فقد قال علي بن الحسين من دعائه عليه السلام في الصلاة على حملة العرش وكل ملك مقرب، قال الإمام: وميكائيل ذو الجاه عندك والمكان الرفيع من طاعتك وجبريل الأمين على وحيك المطاع في أهل سماواتك المكين لديك المقرب عندك. والروح الذي هو على ملائكة الحجب. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. If you remember, we began the tashrih and the commentary on this third dua from Sahifa Sajjadiyyah. This dua, which as you saw in the beginning, Imam alayhi salatu wasalam, this dua is in the praise of the angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those who are, Imam refers to as the bearers of the throne, Hamalatu Arsh. And last week, whenever we had the last Dua Tawassul program, and I spoke about this commentary, we began discussing regarding the angels. And we talked about a few features that are mentioned in the books of Ahadith and as well as Quran. There are about 90 verses in Quran that talk about and give us news of these angels. So we mentioned some of the elements of Iman, which includes belief in the angels. This is just a recap. We talked about how angels are those who are bearing witness over the Tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as mentioned in the ayat of Quran. Many verses talk about the ibadat of the angels. Many talk about the du'as of the malaika, and so on and so forth. Specifically speaking, Imam mentions the great angels that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, with different ranks that they possess amongst themselves. Here, in these two segments that I recited for you, Imam says, وَمِيكَائِيلُ ذُو الْجَاهِ عِنْدَكَ وَالْمَكَانِ الرَّفِي مِنْ طَاعَتِكَ. Mikael, possessor of standing with you. That means Jah is maqam, is a place, a status. Zul Jah, sahib maqam. Wal makan al-rafi, and the raised up place in your obedience. And Imam remains content with this much as far as Mikael is concerned. Then Imam talks about Jibreel Amin. Jibreel, entrusted with your revelation, obeyed by the inhabitants of your heaven, distinguished there in your presence, and amongst those who are muqarrabin, muqarrab of yours. And that's again a maqam of Jibreel. And then Allah talks about وَالرُّوحُ الَّذِي هُوَ عَلَى مَلَائِكَةِ الْحُجُبِ, the spirit who is over the angels of the veils. And in discussion of hujub, talks about in various riwayat from Masumin that there are 7 hujub in maybe relation to the 7 heavens, and each one of these hijab, hujub is the plural of hijab, is the distance of 500 years of travel. So just imagine how, when the travel is calculated in the day and age that we live in, with the it says light years, because of the extent of travel to some of these planets requires a long period of travel. They calculate it with light years. So it says, the first hijab between us and Allah is actually compilation of 7 hujub, and each one is 500 years apart as far as the travel is concerned between them. And then there's hijab duwam, the second hijab, hujubul at-tani masalan, and there are 70 further veils in between them, and every 2 of them is 500 years apart. And similarly, there are many other riwayat that talk about, for example, when Rasulullah ascended to Miraj, between Allah and his khalq, there are 90,000 hijabs or veils or hujub. And Prophet is narrating this. He says, the closest ones are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is me and Israfil, for example. and between me and him are 4 hijab, and these are the hijab of Nur, and so on and so forth. So you get the idea of this concept of light years when it comes to travel and ascending to these different planets and going to these different stars and planets, and what else as insan is trying to get to, trying to explore our galaxy, and how they calculate the travel time between them. Imam alludes to this hujub, and inshallah I'll get into that hopefully next week. Tonight, I just want to very briefly talk about the 2 angels, Mikael and Jibreel alayhi salam, from the perspective of Quran, as well as what Imam alludes to when he talks about some of the attributes of these 2 angels. And then inshallah, this last segment that we will recite, وَالَّذِينَ لَا تَدْخُلُهُمْ سَأْمَةٌ مِّن du'ubin, those who become not wearied by perseverance. That means these angels, they don't get tired or exhausted and flagged by toil, whom passions distract not from glorifying you, and whose magnification of thee is never cut off by the inattention of heedless moments. The translation a little bit Shakespearean style could sometimes lose the actual meaning. But inshallah, we'll try and get to number 7 as well. In Surah Baqarah, verse number 90, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to Mikael as Mikal. So Allah talks about him and he refers to him as that. And the animosity with him is equal to the animosity with Allah, with prophets, and with the angels as well. So Surah Baqarah, verse number 90. Let me pull that up so I can, unfortunately, I don't have it memorized. It says, وَمِكَالَ, right? "98. Man kana aduwan lillahi wa malaikatihi wa rusulihi wa jibrila wa mikala fa inna allaha aduwwun lil kafirin." So Surah Baqarah, verse number 98. Whoever is an enemy of Allah, his angels, his messengers, Jibreel, and Mikal, which is of course another name for Mikael, indeed Allah is the enemy of unbelievers. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala considers the animosity toward these angels as an animosity toward himself. In some riwayat, we read that Jibreel is the mu'azzin of the inhabitants of the heavens, and Mikael or Mikal is their imam. And we know that the maqam of imam is superior to mu'azzin. So some riwayat allude to that as well. But we've always heard that Jibreel Amin has the higher status, and therefore there's more discussion about him than Mikael. So some of the features of Jibreel alayhi wasalam that are mentioned, it says, وَجِبْرَائِيلُ الْأَمِينَ عَلَى وَحْيِكَ. Allah has referred to Jibreel as Ruhul Amin, as the word Amin is mentioned over here. Rasulun Kareem, Dhi Quwwatin, Muta'in, Amin, and so on and so forth. It says, in fact, similar ayat talks about animosity towards Jibreel separately. While in the first ayat 98, both of them were mentioned. And so I recited ayat number 98 of Surah Baqarah for you. Man kana aduwan lillahi wa malaikatihi wa rusulihi wa Jibreel wa Mikal. If you look to the ayat prior to that, it says, Qul man kana aduwan li Jibreel. So exclusively talking about Jibreel alayhi wasalam, that whoever is an enemy of Jibreel, indeed, he has brought it down by the permission of Allah to your hearts. And so in the second ayat talks about what is the result of this animosity. This as far as Ruhul Amin, the laqab of Ruhul Amin is concerned, and this is mentioned in Surah Shu'ara. It says, وَإِنَّهُ لَتَنزِيلُ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ نَزَلَ بِهِ الرُّوحُ الْأَمِينَ. This is indeed a book sent down by the Lord of all the worlds, brought down by the trustworthy spirit. Ruhul Amin, of course, Jibreel Amin. In Surah Takwir, talks about other features of Hazrat Jibreel as Rasulin Kareem, Dhi Quwwatin, Makin, Muta'in, and Amin. It says the Quran, it says, Innahu laqawlu Rasulin Kareem. Some people translate it, not knowing the context of this, as Rasul being Rasulullah over here, which is not the case. It says the Quran is the word of the that the Quran is the word of the honorable, angelic, mighty messenger. And here, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sending this with Hazrat Jibreel, who is honored in the presence of the Lord of the throne, obeyed by all creatures, and faithful to his trust. This is Surah Takwir, if you refer to ayat number 19 and 20. In this verse, 5 attributes of Jibreel are mentioned, which are indicative of his exalted rank of trustworthiness to descend with revelations. He's Rasulun Kareem, he's Dhi Quwwa, he's Makin, he's Muta', and he's Amin. We read in a tradition from the Holy Prophet who said to Jibreel at the time of revelation, Ma ahsana ma uthniya alayka rabbuk Dhi Quwwatin inda dhil arshil makin. He says, how beautifully has God praised you. Imagine Allah is the one praising you. And then he recited this ayat that Dhi Quwwatin inda dhil arshil makin, Muta'in tamma amin, and so on and so forth. And Prophet asked him, Jibreel, O Jibreel, give us an example of your mightiness and your trustworthiness that is being mentioned. Dhi Quwwa, which is your might, and your trustworthiness, the Amin. Jibreel Amin replied, an example of my might is that I was entrusted with destroying the people of Lut alayhi salam. And then he goes in further details of that, which I'll refrain from mentioning. And the example of my trustworthiness is that I have never failed in the smallest of the commands that have been given to me. Of course, that is the reason they are masum. It says, وَالَّذِينَ لَا تَدْخُلُهُمْ سَأْمَةٌ مِّن دُؤُوبٍ. Those who become not wearied by perseverance. That means nothing slows them down. As far as their ibadat is concerned, as far as their ita'at is concerned, they never fail to perform it. But when it comes to all of these ibadat and when it comes to ita'at, there are impediments for us. There are obstacles in front of us, and we fail to an extent. So the impediments of perfection, in other words, the fact that angels don't get tired, don't become weak, don't feel fatigued in their worship, in their obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in their servitude, and they never step out of bounds of ibadat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is because their existence lacks desires of any sort. While we give them credit for being perseverance, as Imam is saying over here, those who become not wearied by perseverance or exhausted and flagged by toil. There's a reason behind why that doesn't happen to them. And the reason is because their existence is Noor-e Mahad. Their wujud is Noor-e Mahad, which means pure light or absolute light, mere light. If that's a proper translation of Noor-e Mahad. On the contrary, the existence of insan demands various desires in order to remain in this temporal world, for which if those desires were not there, it would be very difficult for insan to remain in this world. These different kinds of desires, instincts, and lusts, if used based on the faculty of intellect that Allah has given, and upon the laws of, upon the laws set by Islam or laws set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or in other words, the Sharia, which tells us to keep taqwa in front of everything, it can make humans above the rank of angels. Similarly, that's the reason when Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib was asked, who's higher, angels or insan? Imam recited a beautiful tradition. I don't have the tradition in front of me, but I'll paraphrase what Imam said. He said, if the aql of insan takes over his shahwa and his desires, then he is above and beyond and superior to angels. But vice versa, if his desires take over his aql and they are the driving source, then he's worse than the animals. So here's the similar thing. It can take humans above the ranks of angels, but if we give into these desires, instincts, and lusts, then we are lower, and we have lowered ourselves below the level of animals. It says, Alam tara ila alladhina baddalu ni'matallahi kufran wa hallu qawmahum dar al-bawar. Have you not seen those who exchanged the favor of Allah with disbelief and landed their nation in a house of ruin? The prosperity of the world and the hereafter in refraining from lustful desires. Although fulfilling the tenets of the religion and adorning the proper akhlaq and morals, and being careful about halal and haram is a difficult and a tall task. It's not that easy to be equipped with all of these things, to follow all the tenets, to adorn good akhlaq, and to be heedful and careful about halal and haram. But if anyone wants the prosperity of this world and the hereafter, must prepare to face these difficulties. In fact, Kalam of Amir al-Mu'mineen also alludes to this in Nahj al-Balagha when he says, فَلْيَسْتَعِدْ, when he speaks about that whoever claims to be our follower, فَلْيَسْتَعِدْ, then they should get ready to face turmoil and difficulties, because following our guidance or following our path is not an easy path. Difficulties will come your way, left and right. But all these difficulties are also needed if you want the prosperity of this world and the hereafter. You must prepare yourself to face these difficulties and don't back down. The grace of Allah will follow along the way when you are ready to face these difficulties. The grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will follow behind you. On the other hand, falling in these lustful desires isn't that difficult, right? Refraining from it is difficult, but falling prey and victim to them is a very easy thing to do. Anyone can fall prey to this. Anyone can, be a victim of that. So it destroys the foundation of the safety of this world and the hereafter, and results in the severe punishment of the Day of Judgment. I want to conclude, as I've run out of my time, with one verse from Quran and the explanation of that ayat from Surah Maryam, verse number 59, which says, فَخَلَفَ مِنْ بَعْدِهِمْ خَلْفٌ أَضَاعُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَاتَّبَعُوا الشَّهَوَاتِ فَسَوْفَ يَلْقَوْنَ غَيًّا. But the generations that succeeded them wasted their prayers and followed their desires, so they shall encounter error. It's not surprising by any means that if you read in the tafsir of this ayah, you will find that Prophet, after reciting this verse, he said the following, and this is sort of like a prediction. He said, يَكُونُ خَلْفٌ مِنْ بَعْدِ 60 سَنَةٍ أَضَاعُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَاتَّبَعُوا الشَّهَوَاتِ فَسَوْفَ يَلْقَوْنَ غَيًّا ثُمَّ يَكُونُ خَلْفٌ يَقْرَؤُونَ الْقُرْآنَ لَا يَعْدُوا تَرَاقِيَهُمْ وَيَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنَ ثَلَاثَةٌ مُؤْمِنٌ وَمُنَافِقٌ وَفَاجِرٌ. He said, after 60 years, people will come in power who will ruin or who will waste the salat, as the ayat of Quran also says, ada'us salat, they will waste the prayers, and wattaba'u shahawat, and they will follow their desires. So after 60 years, will come a group of people who will, after me, the Prophet is saying, they will be drowned in their lustful desires, and they will waste the prayer. Wasting the prayer is equal to wasting the entire madhab, because as-salatu amududdin. And they will see the results of their misguidance very soon. After them will come a group who will recite the Quran, but the Quran will not go below their throats and larynx. It will remain here in their hulqum. Meaning, because of the show off and vanity and being content with the words only and not paying heed to the meanings of the words of Allah. Quran will be recited by three groups of people, Prophet said: the believers, mu'min; the hypocrites, munafiq; and fajir, the lewd and the immoral ones. If you look at this hadith under this ayat of Surah Maryam, verse number 59, the first part of this narration is in complete alignment, and it's a complete implementation of the time of Banu Umayyah, and especially that of Yazid in the year 60 after Hijrah, and the atrocities that came afterwards when he usurped the reins of Islam and the event of Karbala took place. Prophet said, they will ada'u salat wa taba'u shahawat. Second part aligns with the rule of Abbasids, the Khilafat Abbasiyah, those who use Islam and Quran only to the words. They remain content with the words of Quran. They don't want to go further beyond that. Let's not look into Quran. And if I share an incident with you in close, is that in the years that we've been blessed to go to Mecca to perform the blessed Hajj and for Umrah, I've personally encountered this. You're sitting there in Masjid-e-Nabawi, and we're explaining to our group that, this is the masjid, associated with Rasulullah. And this is the mosque, which is the place where Rasulullah used to stand and lead prayer. This is the masjid where Wahi used to come down. And between the Mimbar and the Rawda of Rasul, there's a place which is called Riyadul Jannah, a portion of paradise, praying 2 rakats namaz, and that is as if you have prayed in Jannah. There are different ustawana, or the pillars, associated with different events and different people, praying 2 rakat namaz on each one of those. While I'm explaining this, a person, a mutawwa, one of their sheikhs comes up and says, "Ya sheikh, there's no room for any sort of muhadara or discussion here. Only Quran and only salat. You can't do anything else in masjid. All you got to do is recite Quran, and that too, just recite the Quran that is sitting over here, and pray. That's it. Nothing else should be done in masjid." And so I'm just explaining to the people that, their first time here, explaining to them the importance of this place. No, la. You want a further conflict? Let's go. But if you want to be in this masjid, just read Quran and salat, and that's it. That means don't even look into what this Quran is telling us. That particular incident is against the essence of Quran itself. Salat, which is the amud of deen, which is the pillar of the religion. Those who are the caretakers are stopping one from opening their thinking and minds to think about the depths and the understanding of this book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are some of the words from the kalam of our third Imam, or rather our kalam of our fourth Imam, Imam Ali ibn Hussein Zain al-Abidin alayhi salatu wasalam, in the third dua from Sahifa Sajjadiyyah. Inshallah, we'll continue in the weeks to come. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Mutawajjih ziyarat. Assalamu alaikum ya Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum ya Habiballah. Assalamu alaikum ya Khiyyaratullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum ya Aba Abdullah. Assalamu alaikum ya Ibn Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa ala jaddika wa abika wa ala ummika wa akhika wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum ya Ghani wal Ghuraba. السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء. السلام عليك يا شمس الشموس وعنيس النفوس أيها المدفون بأرض توصل ابن موسى الرضا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان. السلام عليك إمام الإنس والجان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك وظهورك وجعلنا من أعوانك وانصارك ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. As you know, the programs are being held in Masjid, the Shab Jummah program, Salatul Jum'ah, and all the other Jashan and the Majalis that are to come, inshallah, Wiladat for 8th Imam and other programs, inshallah, all will be taking place in person in Masjid without the need of pre-registration. So we urge all of you to take advantage of this opportunity. All the Salat, Fajr, Dhuhr, and Maghriban is also offered in Masjid. Make sure that you take advantage of praying